I finally played Axiom Verge, and I mean, gee golly, the Metroidvania subgenre is seriously one of the deepest in gaming. And with as many incredible games that could lay claim to that top spot, this one feels right up there with some of the very, very best that I've ever played. So stick around as we take a deep dive into the tentacle-wielding, body horror morphing, terrifying AI talking head episode of No-stalgia. The year is 2015. NASA launched the first probe to orbit a dwarf planet, Ceres. What a view. Hotline bling memes were all the rage as Drake continued his goofy, cringe dominance over popular music that somehow continues to this fucking day. And this dress. This goddamn dress was the talk of every internet blog, coffee shop, and water cooler in America. It's white and yellow, by the way. And while I was oh so close to exiting my gamingless era near the end of my 20s, most of my gaming included infrequent online matches of Third Strike and playing Arkham City combat arenas. I swear I was
top 10 in that bitch, like.
I wish I still had the footage, like I was number 3 in the world as Catwoman. So incredibly, 2015 would bring quite a few games along that would become some of my all-time favorites. I'm looking at you, Bloodborne and Undertale, but I wouldn't play them until 2016 and in some cases even later when I finally rejoined the land of gaming with a Black Friday PS4 purchase in the last quarter of 2015. Though I owned an original copy of Castlevania Symphony of the Night all the way back in 1997, I had yet to play any Metroids to this point. Needless to say, my portmanteau was missing quite a large chunk. But that didn't stop me from playing many games in this subgenre in the last decade. Hollow Knight, Guacamelee, The Messenger, finally a Metroid game, Dread, and probably a dozen or more others. Yet, somehow I missed Axiom Verge. It was always on my radar, a tertiary, orbiting, tantalizing piece, but I never did take up my controller until now. So, is this indie gem worth your time today in 2023? Let's go ahead and find out. Tom Happ is a man after my own heart. When I decide to play a game for this channel, I do a little like alpha research, just kind of seeing if there's a compelling story or something interesting about it that's worth telling y'all about. And man, this one certainly is. As a creator that makes every aspect of what you see and hear right now, the script, recording, music, editing, everything. When I opened up the Axiom Verge wiki and saw Tom Happ, Thomas Happ, Tom fucking Happ, I was already super intrigued. And I'm glad that was what pulled me in, because what this one guy pulled off is nothing short of a miracle. It really demonstrates what a unified vision, whether one person or not, can truly accomplish when firing on all cylinders. Axiom Verge is a pixel art, retro style Metroidvania that wears many of its inspirations directly on its sleeve, but with a fresh coat of paint and swagger. The most obvious homage is to Metroid, and while I haven't played a whole lot of the series, my time with Dread and poking around the Switch to try out Super Metroid told me really everything I needed to know. From the alien-like style and creature design and world building to some of the body horror elements of the thing, you figure out the atmosphere very quickly in this one, but you also see how the Castlevania game shaped it, as well as Bionic Commando, Rygar, and even Contra. It really feels like a slow-cooked stew that was left to simmer all day, becoming more than just the ingredients in the pot. It's so interesting to imagine this as just the interests and inspirations of a generation filtered through one guy. This is not the typical way that games are made, and it's really cool to see Tom's vision through his own lens. Upon Axiom Verge's initial release date of March 31st, 2015 on the PlayStation 4, reception was largely positive, though a slightly mixed bag. It would be released on a variety of systems, including Vita, Wii U, Xbox One, and Switch in the subsequent years, both in physical and digital forms, with a few special packages that included soundtracks and other such goodies. The Metacritic scores have about a 10-point banding, from a 78 on the Vita all the way up to the Wii U version getting an 89. Now the sweet spot of that is right at an 84, which feels in line with most reviews of the game, which often cite an incredible atmosphere, well-balanced backtracking, and a distinct understanding for the genre at its heart. Some reviews took shots at the somewhat loose controls, late game difficulty spikes, and an adherence to subgenre tropes. Taking a cross-section of user reviews from all posted platforms, users come out to about an 8 or so, closely in line with the critical reception. Sales figures weren't super easy to come by, but between VG charts, Steam Spy, and some sleuthing of old tweets from Tom himself, I'd imagine the game did somewhere around 750,000 in sales. Truly a terrific turnout for a one-man show. Okay, so usually this is where I begin to run down the long list of artists, musicians, character designers, and developers that lend their hand to the game, but let me save you just a little confusion.
Tom Happ.
The credits tell you everything, so here's a picture of him, and another, and another. Outside of a couple names for business, marketing, and bookkeeping, there's really not much else to see. An interesting tidbit of development of this game is that Sony Computer Entertainment of America stepped in with their publisher's fund after he pitched them the game, and that secured its initial release on the console. In preparation for this video, I sat and watched an interview with Tom and Retro RGB, as well as an official documentary about the making of the game via IGN and Two Player Productions, both linked down below. And it's really mind-blowing, inspirational, and a little harrowing in how this game came about. I won't go into as heavy of details as those resources, because I really think you should go watch them if you just need a kick in the ass for some inspiration. Tom is still one man. Yeah, I know, crazy. But prior to the development of this game, he created a Metroid homage game called Orn that would provide him the blueprint for where to go next. In the span of about 5 years, he took Axiom Verge from just an idea to something pretty much ready to be published. Much like a delicious layer cake, he describes his process as a very step-by-step mentality. Design the environments, then animate, then enemies, etc., and so forth. This allowed him to build the bricks and not end up bogged down in the minutia, just plugging away day after day, month after month, and seeing the big wins, which helped to keep him motivated. The way that he described his process in this interview really reminded me of my approach with videos for this channel. And he also mentioned that making the music is the easiest part, and I can relate to that. Tom also opted out of a Kickstarter, which is a pretty typical path that many creators take, with the idea that he could keep a singular vision that he could follow through on in his own time. This seemed like a very smart move, and he is such a nice, likable guy with his heart in the right place from everything I've seen. Once again, check it out if you're interested in the grind of a single developer. Huge shouts out to Dan Adelman, who was instrumental in handling the business side of things for Tom. Even the most talented people need those advocates with the knowledge in their fields, and Dan was that dude. But the truly harrowing parts came after release. I'll leave that all for the documentary, but I will say, rest in peace to Max. As a dog owner myself who is grateful for the chance to work from home and spend time with her when I get the opportunities, my heart really goes out to Tom and his wife. And man, I wish the absolute best to his son and his family. Just, absolutely heart-wrenching stuff. Yet, as fascinating and as inspiring as the development was for the game, the outcome might be even more so. The story is
wild as shit.
You play as Trace, a scientist working in a lab in New Mexico that subsequently explodes. He then awakens in Sudra, an alien world where he can only hear one voice, a giant mecha head named Elsa Nova. Everything else around him wants him dead as he continues to find strange creatures and lots of ancient technology. As Trace continues exploring this mysterious space, he learns that this is not like any other world he's come to know, and what is separating him from his world is the Breach. In a time past, a man named Athetos came to this world of Sudra and killed every living person using an unknown pathogen. Elsa Nova and others like her, known as the Rusalki, were all that were left. Elsa Nova tasks him with helping repair the other Rusalki, which leads him to many intense encounters, pushing him to the literal brink of insanity and back. Finally, after coming across an aborted, cloned version of himself, it's just all become too much. You come to find out that Trace actually lived through that explosion, being blinded and maimed, creating theories that were criticized by the scientific community, earning him the nickname Athetos. Directly translated from Greek, this means without a thesis. Oh fuck.
Plot twist.
Trace is a replicant, or an alternate reality version of Athetos, younger before the explosion. The Rusalki cloned him, as they have many other times, and he's furious when he learns about this. After Elsinova kills Trace out of anger, Ophelia brings him back, and they agree that they'll let him talk to Athetos and agree to not kill him in the process. After ascending to Athetos' chamber, Trace finds him sealed and unable to move. Demanding answers, Athetos explains that Sudra held the cradle of humanity's best version where no war, famine, or disease existed. However, he did not count on the Rusalki, described as masters of war, being able to get out if he released the technology, so instead he released a pathogen to kill everyone in the civilization and entombed the Rusalki with him. After defeating Athetos' bodyguards, Elsinova kills him, despite telling Trace that she wouldn't. Trace faints as Elsinova laments that he is not just a mere clone and that they may see each other one day again. The game ends and you realize you're in some sort of time loop or alternate universe or something. It's trippy and I fucking loved it. And it's one of those great pieces of storytelling that leaves just enough to interpretation to be talked about for years to come. If you've played it, I'd really be interested if you subscribe to the single verse or multiverse version of the story or some variant of the two. Let me know down in the comments below. Now, the gameplay in Axiom Verge is really where the fun is to be had. This is the part of the Metroidvania formula that many have fallen on and others have risen above and built a masterpiece off of. Now, in my opinion, one of the cornerstones, one of the key tenets of a great Metroidvania is the way that the game systems and the game world coalesce. And Verge sends that part of the game over the fucking park wall. You feel weak, underwhelming, and honestly, it really isn't that much fun at first. I had a moment where I thought it might end up being boring or too vanilla, but after a couple hours or so, as you get more combat options, abilities, and movement methods, the world opens up, quite literally. Backtracking is so good in this game with some pretty decent signposting that rarely leaves you lost. I did get lost a few times, eventually utilizing a guide around the halfway mark after being stuck for about an hour, but generally speaking, if you putz around enough, you can find your way. Some moments are quite esoteric, especially later on, but the exploration is super gratifying and makes you want to drill into every wall, scale every cliffside, and corrupt every enemy you find. And let's talk about that corruption tool, called the Address Disruptor, because this is one of the coolest piece of kits in any game that I've ever seen. Not only does it let you corrupt parts of the environment, which can either create blocks, make new pathways, or remove obstacles, you can also corrupt every non-boss enemy in the game. And when you do this, they all react in very different ways. Some enemies get much easier, while some actually get quite a bit harder. This cool glitching effect impacts how you look around your surroundings, and at first I thought the game was fucking up. It's a really sick tool in your toolbox, and I wish more games would try stuff like this. You also get a variety of movement methods, from a grapple arm a la Bionic Commando to a few levels of teleportation to a drone. And by the end, you feel like you can dash, move, and fight your way through anything. You are no longer a weakling. You are a literal machine. Now, as far as the combat, this is a run and gun through and through. With upwards of 20 weapons, as well as power-ups and size upgrades that impact all of them across the board, you'll never run out of guns to experiment with. From a gun that shoots bullets to one that has projectiles that run on the walls, many of them do not seem essential. I actually only got about a dozen or so in my playthrough, but they do feel great to mess around with. Certain enemies and bosses really benefit from certain weapons, and that is so good to discover and figure out on your own. Beyond exploration and combat, there's a lot of secrets to find, including lore notes, the aforementioned power-up nodes, even codes you can put into your password tool to unlock even further places to explore. That is not even to mention that if you find the game becoming particularly challenging, There are codes to break through in a variety of ways, with a granular ability to change how much it impacts the game as well. Now, enemy design is awesome, with lots of body horror, limbs stretched, tentacle monsters to try to end you. The address disruptor nearly doubles the combat encounters and enemies are smartly mixed throughout. Some can be a whole bitch to deal with, but disrupted become way more manageable. The late game enemies don't seem to be too impacted by disruption though, and will absolutely fuck up your day. The bosses are fantastic overall too, though some are way harder than others. A few have patterns that are so easily cheesed you won't get touched even once, while others make you question your will to live. Most sit somewhere in the middle, and while there aren't that many, they are fun to fight, with some real nail-biting moments. My personal favorite was Talal, an early game boss that really put me through my paces and felt like that sink or swim encounter that teaches you a lot about the game. All in all, the combat, exploration, and extras within the gameplay really make this feel special. My only major beefs are with significant difficulty spikes here and there, as well as some boss cheese and head scratching, where the hell do I go now moments. Nothing the genre isn't familiar with, and I'd say it avoids many of the typical trappings, despite succumbing to some minor setbacks. The visuals are so sick, like, no, seriously, you may want to throw up looking at some of these abominations. I've gone through most of this trying to avoid the M word. I'm sure the comparisons to Metroid have been written about to all hell and back, but this is where you really start to see that inspiration. The background art of this planet is incredibly memorable, takes lots of cues from Samus Aran's adventures. Creature design too, but it definitely has its own design language. This is high-res retro after all. I love how massive enemies end up exploding into these big particles and blocks, for example. And you definitely appreciate what Tom was going for. Many enemies take the form of known creatures in our world like spiders or pill bugs that have mutated into terrifying versions, and yet others look incredibly human. And the story alludes to why, if not outright telling you. You're never not shitting your pants looking at these creatures, at least I wasn't. Performance on my PS5 was buttery smooth at 60 frames per second. I did notice this weird motion blur in some rooms I can't say I love, but outside of that, the visual presentation is on point. They feel both familiar and foreign at the same time, which I think was the intent here. The audio is also wonderful. The impact of the weapons are all crunchy with a real lo-fi, chunky aesthetic. I love the yells and shrieks of enemies as they're hit, lending their sound to the otherworldly, uncanny nature of everything. There's always another satisfying sound, whether when traveling between tunnels, squaring off against hulking beasts, or even just changing between weapons. Now, some effects were a bit overused for my taste, but I'll say it again. It was one man, people, and generally everything is haunting and appropriately jarring. As someone that bangs out the music for his videos first, as that's the easiest part for me as well, I really appreciate what he's done here to the maximum. Trace Awakens is just, it immediately entered classic status. The synth work, 4 on the floor kick pattern, ascending and descending melodies, and Terminator-esque pads that feel like every first level in a classic game. The dream's sparse, percussive patterns, phaser sound effects, off-kilter beeps, and clean arpeggio tell you everything you need to know as it plays in-game. Trace Rising is a fantastic break from many of the other tracks, with an upbeat, almost disco drum line that gets you ready to shoot some goddamn bosses right in their face. I could probably run down all 18 tracks in this game and praise them to one degree or another, but seriously, do yourself a favor and go check out the Axiom Verge soundtrack, which is streaming on all major platforms, and if you really love it, maybe consider supporting it by heading over to Tom's Bandcamp. All in all, my only major qualm with the music is there is just not enough of it. Like, I wish there were a couple more boss themes, despite my love of Trace Rising, and maybe Inexorable got pretty grating over time. Outside of that rare miss to me, the soundtrack sets a certain atmosphere and ambiance that is hard to deny. So with all that said, do I believe that Axiom Verge is worth giving a try today?
Yeah, you're darn tootin'.
Axiom Verge is not only a fantastic homage to one of my favorite subgenres, it stands closely to the Mount Rushmore, if not just on the outskirts. Do I think it's a better game than the games that inspired it? Well, that depends. In some ways, yes. In others, no. I've played many Metroidvanias in my time. Some were incredible, some were derivative, others got some stuff right and missed other big things. This game gets so much right, from the atmosphere to the storytelling to the exploration to the combat, that any missteps are pretty easily forgiven. And I think I'll say this one more time before I leave.
It was one fucking guy, guys. Come on.
I bet he wishes that he could have traced himself. Oh wow. Tracing. He was a clone. Yeah, I just now put that together. Like right now.
Sick.
So click here to check out additional nostalgia videos. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at TheGamersician. And don't forget to eat some fresh fruit today. All right? Peace.